Hi there, this is Mrs. Baines, your librarian at Whitman Post, and I'm going to be reading chapters 21 through 23. Chapter 21, Evan. Thursday morning, Rafe was back on his corner, holding a can of bug spray. "Tuck your pants into your socks," he shouted at Evan. There could be ticks in there." "Shh!" It was 6:30 in the morning, and the whole reason they were out here this early was so that no one would see them. Evan stood not far away, covered in bug spray, confronted by a wall of thorny bushes. On the other side of it was the place where the Martinville Library had once stood. It was the best place he could think of to look for clues. But it had looked a lot more explorable from the school bus window. Should he just push in? He wished for the 1,000th time that his best friend was allowed to go places. It looked possible to get really lost in there. But he figured that Rafe would at least tell someone to look for him if Evan never came out. That was good. "What are you waiting for?" Rafe shouted. Rafe always said that when he was finally allowed, he was going to do absolutely everything at least once. But that was easy to say. Evan felt something move against his leg, and his heart gave a wild thump before he realized it was only the cat. "Goldie? Sunshine? Do you have a real name?" he asked the cat. The cat gave him a 3-part meow and then moved between his feet, rubbing his cheek against Evan's right sneaker and then the left one. Evan was really glad to see that cat, he realized. "Hi, cat," he said softly. He felt a little better after that. He drew his thumb down his forehead, tightening his imaginary cap so that it wouldn't get pulled off by something in the thicket in front of him, and then he plunged into the wall of green. He parted branches and leaves with his hands as he walked, slowly trying to go in a straight line. He imagined a clearing part way in, but couldn't see one anywhere. It was hard to imagine that the big library Mr. O'Neill had described, which Evan pictured as almost a castle with large blue doors, could have stood right here. But his dad always said that if all the humans disappeared from Earth, pretty soon you would never even know they had been there, because nature was so powerful it would grow up over everything, pulling down the buildings and the bridges. He sucked in his breath and stopped to disentangle himself from a skinny but viciously thorny branch that had attached itself to his sleeve. There was another one clinging to his sock. He bent down to pull it off. Were they trying to grab him? No, he told himself. Nothing was trying to grab him. When he straightened up, all he saw were more branches and leaves, and he couldn't even remember which direction he'd been walking in. Why did this feel so impossible? Then suddenly the cat was there again, daintily stepping through the bush. He made a quick circle around Evan before setting off at an angle. "Wait up," Evan said, and followed the cat. There was a clearing just a few feet beyond where Evan had been standing. He felt his lungs expand the moment he stepped into it, took a deep breath and said, "Wow." There was a kind of ruin here, not like the ancient ruins that they'd studied in Mr. O'Neill's class, but still a ruin. A stony foundation poked up here and there from the grass. Evan stepped up onto a crumbling chunk of it and, balancing, saw that if he could draw a line connecting all the stony parts, he would be looking at a big empty square with a cat sitting in the middle of it. This was the library. He jumped off his chunk into the square. The cat stayed put, head up and feet neatly put together, looking very much at home. "This is it," Evan told him. "We're in the library." It almost looked like the cat nodded at him. Just once. That's when Evan realized there was no basement. He felt his heart drop. He'd known that there wouldn't be a building here anymore, but he'd imagined that there somehow be a basement. The basement where the fire had started, according to that newspaper article Ray found online. The basement where he'd hoped to find some clues, or one clue even. "They must have filled it in," he told the cat. Evan walked all the way around the library footprint looking for clues. There were some blackened bits of stuff, metal, wood, just tiny shards of unrecognizable things. He touched a few, but they were nothing. He did another loop round. He found an old dime, nothing good. The cat stayed right where he was, and even though nothing felt exactly scary, Evan was glad he wasn't in there by himself. Then he heard Rafe's voice. "Are you okay?" Evan smiled. Even if his legs did get hairy in middle school, Rafe would be there too. Suddenly that seemed really, really good. He yelled back, "Yes, I'm okay!" But he was also ready to give up. He touched the scratches along his neck and wished he knew the fastest way out. "Do me a favour," he yelled. "Call the cat." "Did you say call the cat?" "Yes, call him." After a second, Rafe's voice boomed out louder than ever. "Here, sunshine! Here, kitty, kitty!" The cat stayed where he was. Evan walked over, wondering if he should pet him. But not all cats like to be petted, and Evan had been scratched up enough for one day. "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty!" The cat looked up at Evan and then lifted one paw. There was something between his feet, Evan realised. Something that looked like a ring. Slowly he dropped into a squat and reached for it. "Here, Sonny!" Evan hadn't realised how loud Rafe could make himself. But he didn't care about people seeing them anymore. He had found an actual clue. It had to be a clue. "Mr. Kitty Cat!" Rafe boomed. "Come!" Almost as if he'd been waiting to hear his proper name, the cat rotated his ears, raised his tail, and started moving lightly towards Rafe's voice. Evan followed, clutching two very dirty keys on a ring. Chapter 22. Al. I made apple pancakes for dinner, but last night's supper was no cheerier than the night before. Then, because his broom remains elusive, Mr. Brock spent the rest of the evening gathering dust balls with his fingers and flinging them out the front door, which I opened for him. Miss Scoggin and I both watched him with concern until it was time for bed. This morning, Miss Scoggin came downstairs with her librarian pin stuck to her shirt with a great amount of tape. "It was the only way," she said, slapping it with one hand. "The possible thing will not stay on." The dear cat has stayed outside with my little library for 3 whole days and nights now. Miss Scoggin has stopped asking for him. I feel the need to correct myself. The little library is not mine. Libraries are meant to grow and be shared. Perhaps it is time for me to explain how the little free library of Martinville came to be. Well, the how is simple. I built it. This is the why. Last Sunday morning, when I arrived with Miss Scoggin's tea, she was already sitting up in her bed with her librarian badge pinned on and a dissatisfied look on her face. The moment she saw me, she sighed an enormous sigh and then started to tell me once again that it was time I took my place. First thing in the morning, every morning, and me doing nothing wrong, me just standing there holding her tea. Try, reader, to imagine 20 years of this sort of thing. Would you not sometimes lose your patience? Would you not? I shouted, "What are you even talking about? Why is this not my place, just as it is yours? Is this your house? You are just greedy," I was shouting at Miss Scoggin. I expected her to shout back. She did not. But she was surprised, I could tell, and secretly pleased. She said, "My dear, you are a librarian, are you not?" "You know I am." I was not done shouting, apparently. "Same as you are." "But do you see me always telling you that you are in the wrong place?" "You do not." She stirred a sugar cube into her tea with a pinky finger. Ghosts are impervious to heat, and smiled at me. "I have, Mr. Brock. You must find your own patrons, my dear." I threw my hands up in the air. "There is no library, in case you have forgotten," but I was not exactly shouting any more. She gave another sigh. "We must do with what we have." It was what she used to say in our library when we ran out of binding glue or light bulbs. We must do with what we have. "But we have nothing, Miss Scoggin. There was a massive fire, in case you have forgotten, and nothing is left." "What am I supposed to do with nothing?" She just looked at me. In fact, we did not have exactly nothing left of our beautiful old library. We had a single library cart and the books that happened to be on it that terrible night of the fire. But I was not sure how to be a librarian with one cart of miscellaneous books. "And it is not just you," she said gently. "We are all in the wrong place." I felt very confused, and knowing that my invisibility was probably at an all-time low, I hid extra well during the day's Sunday tour in the very back of the broom closet. As I waited there, barely breathing, with an old brass hook prodding the back of my neck, I reminded myself that Miss Scoggin was my supervisor. I must consider her advice, repetitive as it was. So that night I went to the basement, walked past the apples and potatoes, and stood in the farthest, dimmest corner looking at the last library cart. Just then, beside the cart, something moved. I'm not proud to say I let out a yelp, imagining a snake. At the sound of my voice, a furry face appeared. The dear cat! He very sweetly stood on one of my feet, asking for a hug. And then, from my arms, he hopped lightly to the library cart. I stared. The dear cat was exactly where he had stood on the terrible night of the fire, when I pushed him, he was just a kitten then, barely bigger than my two fists together, along with a cart of books out of the burning library basement to safety. This was after I'd given up trying to find Miss Scoggin in the smoke, and before I finally found the dear boy. I do not mention Mr. Brock because it was after hours. I thought all the patrons had left and did not realise he was still there. It was altogether strange to be looking at that library cart after so many years. Miss Scoggin's words of that morning returned to me. "You are a librarian, are you not?" And that is when it happened. An idea began to form in my mind. I would build a new library, a very small one. It had been a long time since I'd had an idea. It felt very good. I did not go to bed that night. Instead, I sketched. I measured, I marked, I gathered my tools, and then it was time to wake Miss Scoggin. I would need a lookout. I never wondered before the fire whether ghosts need to sleep. They do. At least we did. And some ghosts, like Miss Scoggin, are very grouchy about waking up before dawn and being led to the basement before their morning tea. "But why on earth must you accomplish this task before sunrise?" she said, wiggling her bare toes on the damp basement floor. Ghosts are impervious to damp. She knew all about my invisibility problems, so I did not answer by saying, "Because when I am out in daylight, people are often seeing me." Miss Scoggin did not know that people sometimes even spoke to me by accident. I can only imagine the long list of criticisms she would have for a ghost who talks to people. But if I had not answered them, I would have felt very rude. Instead, I used the fewest words possible and got away before anyone had time to understand that they were talking to a ghost. "I thought you'd be pleased," I said to Miss Scoggin, brandishing my hammer. She looked curious and scanned the basement. When she saw the cart of library books before her, she suddenly scowled. "I do hope you plan to reshelve these books, my dear. Reshelving is a priority. Imagine a reader in search of a book finding only a blank space, as if some bully had knocked out a tooth." I reminded her gently that there was no library anymore. "Oh, yes, yes," she said, waving at me impatiently. "I remember." As I have said, the books before us and the cart they sat upon were all that were left. "I'm going to take care of these books," I told her. "It is time. This is my project." "Good girl. How can I help?" "You could have knocked me down with a bookmark." Miss Scoggin was offering to assist me. I felt quite emotional, but in fact that was exactly why I had brought her down here. I asked her if she could whistle. She could. So we walked out into the night together. I pushed the cart over the grass while the dear cat rode on top of the books, proudly facing front as if he were sailing a ship.